December 15, 1944. Somewhere in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, an American patrol vanishes into the fog. No gunfire, no radio call, just silence. 20 miles south, another unit reports the same thing. Radios crackling with static, then nothing. In a cramped headquarters tent, illuminated by a single lamp, General George S. Patton stares at a map covered in thin red marks and hastily scribbled notes. His finger traces 3 converging lines while officers around him discuss Christmas leave. They see random intelligence noise. He sees a pattern, a terrifying pattern. 3 lines on a crumpled piece of paper that predict one of the war's deadliest surprises. In 72 hours, 250,000 German soldiers will explode out of these quiet forests in Hitler's final gamble to split the Allied armies in 2. Thousands of American boys will be caught completely unprepared, freezing in foxholes, surrounded by an enemy that isn't supposed to exist anymore. But Patton knows, because of this map, this overlooked, dismissed, hand-drawn map that everyone else thought was meaningless. The question that haunts this story isn't whether the attack will come, it's whether anyone will believe him in time. How did a single map help Patton foresee the last great German offensive when almost nobody else believed him? And why did it nearly cost everything when he was proven right? Let's go back 6 weeks. November 1944. The war is almost over. At least that's what everyone believes. Paris has been liberated. Allied armies are pushing toward the Rhine. Hitler's forces are retreating on every front. The mood in Allied headquarters is almost celebratory. Generals are making bets about which army will reach Berlin first. Some are already planning victory parades. The intelligence reports support this optimism. German units appear disorganized, undersupplied, demoralized. Prisoners of war speak of chaos in their ranks, of boys and old men pressed into service, of fuel shortages and collapsing morale. The Ardennes sector, a dense forest region along the Belgian-German border, is considered so quiet that it's being used as a rest area for exhausted American divisions and a training ground for green troops fresh from the States. The weather is getting worse. Snow falls in thick curtains. Fog settles into the valleys and refuses to lift. Reconnaissance planes are grounded for days at a time, but this doesn't worry command. After all, bad weather affects the Germans too. What can a broken, retreating army do in winter? In this atmosphere of confidence, George Patton is an outlier. A brilliant, abrasive storm of a man who sees war not as chaos, but as patterns, rhythms, predictable human behaviors played out on a grand scale. While other commanders are preparing for a methodical push into Germany, Patton is studying something that keeps him awake at night: a map. Not an ordinary military map. This one has been building over weeks, assembled from fragments of intelligence that individually seem meaningless. Intercepted radio transmissions that suddenly go silent. Reports of train movements in the German rear areas. Fuel depot construction noted by French resistance fighters. Small unit transfers logged by Allied intelligence officers and filed away as routine. Most officers look at this data and see exactly what it appears to be: the normal administrative shuffling of a collapsing military machine, units being consolidated, supplies being stockpiled for winter, defensive preparations. Patton sees something else. He sees the pieces of a puzzle that nobody else is trying to solve. The map itself would look unremarkable to most observers. Standard military topography marked with dozens of small notations in different colored pencils. Red marks indicating German rail traffic, blue circles around fuel depots, thin lines connecting troop movements, dates scribbled in margins, question marks scattered across the Ardennes region. To anyone glancing at it, the markings appear random, scattered, the obsessive work of an intelligence officer with too much time and too little perspective. But Patton has been adding to this map every day, and slowly, almost against his will, he's beginning to see something that fills him with dread. The movements aren't random, they're coordinated, and they're all pointing toward one place: the Ardennes.
He starts with the trains. German rail traffic has been monitored throughout the war, and by late 1944, it's showing all the expected signs of breakdown. Fewer trains running, more civilian traffic, obvious supply shortages. But buried in the routine reports, Patton notices anomalies. Certain rail lines that should be carrying supplies to retreating armies are instead moving traffic in the wrong direction. Trains are disappearing into the region east of the Ardennes and not coming back out. Or at least, not in ways that Allied intelligence can track. When he plots these movements over several weeks, a pattern emerges. It's subtle, just a few extra trains here and there, nothing that would trigger alarm bells, but consistent, regular. As if someone is building up supplies in a specific area while being very careful not to make it obvious. Then there are the fuel depots. The German army is supposed to be running on fumes. Every intelligence assessment emphasizes their critical fuel shortage as a major factor in Allied success, yet resistance networks are reporting new fuel dumps being constructed in forests east of the Ardennes, small ones, camouflaged, positioned not for defense, but for something else. When Patton marks these locations on his map, they form a line. Not a defensive line, a starting line. The kind of fuel positioning you need if you were planning to send armored divisions racing west in a surprise attack. But that's impossible. Everyone knows the Germans don't have the fuel for offensive operations. Except, the map suggests they're building the fuel reserves anyway. The third element is the most troubling. Elite SS Panzer divisions. The kind of units you don't waste on holding defensive positions. Intelligence reports show these divisions being pulled from other fronts and moved into reserve positions behind the Ardennes sector. Officially, they're being rested and refitted. Patton doesn't believe it. You don't rest your best divisions in the middle of winter when your defensive lines are crumbling everywhere else. You rest them when you're preparing them for something that requires fresh, well-equipped troops. Something big. Late one night, Patton sits alone with the map spread across a table. He's been cross-referencing every piece of data, looking for the pattern he knows is there. And then it happens. The eureka moment. The instant when scattered clues suddenly snap into a coherent picture. He overlays 3 separate intelligence maps, one showing rail movements, one showing fuel depot locations, one showing SS division positions. And there it is. 3 converging arrows, all pointing at the Ardennes. Not defensive positions, not retreat preparations. An attack formation. A massive coordinated attack formation being assembled under the cover of winter weather and Allied complacency. His hand trembles slightly as he traces the probable attack routes on the map. If the Germans attack through the Ardennes, they'll be driving toward the Meuse River. If they reach the river and cross it, they'll cut the Allied armies in 2, separating the British forces in the north from the American forces in the south. It's audacious, almost insane. It's the exact kind of desperate high-risk gamble that Hitler would order when facing certain defeat. And the Ardennes is the perfect place to do it. Lightly defended, covered by forests that will hide the attacking force until the last moment, filled with narrow roads that will limit Allied ability to respond quickly, defended by inexperienced troops who won't know what hit them. Patton stares at the map, feeling the cold certainty settle into his chest. This isn't a possibility. It's a prediction. The Germans are coming, soon, through the Ardennes, and almost nobody else sees it. The map isn't predicting German movement, it's predicting disaster. The weight of this knowledge becomes a burden unlike anything he's carried before. Patton is not a man prone to self-doubt, but he understands what he's facing. If he sounds the alarm and he's wrong, he'll waste precious resources and look like a paranoid fool. If he's right, and nobody listens, thousands of men will die in an ambush that could have been prevented. The map has become both his weapon and his curse.
He begins trying to convince others. He brings his analysis to staff meetings. He presents the map to intelligence officers. He argues that the quiet in the Ardennes isn't weakness, it's preparation. The response ranges from polite skepticism to open dismissal. The prevailing intelligence assessment is clear. Germany is finished. They lack the fuel, the manpower, the equipment for offensive operations. What Patton is suggesting is strategically impossible. Officers who respect him personally think he's seeing patterns that aren't there, finding threats in routine military logistics. Others who find his aggressive style irritating roll their eyes and whisper that Georgie is becoming paranoid in his old age. One intelligence colonel listens to his presentation and says, "General, you're seeing ghosts in the forest. The Germans are beaten." The frustration is maddening. Patton isn't presenting a hunch or a gut feeling. He has data. He has patterns. He has the map. But in a room full of optimistic generals planning the final push into Germany, he's a voice of doom that nobody wants to hear. The resistance isn't just institutional inertia. There are logical reasons for doubt. The weather is terrible. Moving large armored formations through the Ardennes in winter would be a logistical nightmare. The Germans would need surprise, fuel, good weather, and perfect timing. Even if they had all those elements, what would they accomplish? A temporary breakthrough? The Allies have air superiority, superior numbers, and control of the supply lines. Any German offensive would ultimately fail, costing them resources they can't replace. It's a militarily senseless gamble. Unless you're Hitler, and you're betting everything on one last roll of the dice. Patton makes a decision. If nobody else will prepare, he will. Quietly, without official authorization, he begins positioning his Third Army for a rapid redeployment north. He doesn't tell his staff it's because of the map. He frames it as routine contingency planning. He orders supply lines to be extended toward the Ardennes. He has his logistics officers pre-plan routes for a 90-degree pivot of the entire army. He rehearses staff procedures for coordinating a major shift in operational direction. His officers think he's being obsessively thorough. They don't realize he's preparing for a battle that hasn't started yet. The map sits on his desk, a constant reminder of the threat only he seems to recognize. At night when he looks at it, he doesn't see lines and markings anymore. He sees faces. Young American soldiers, 18 and 19 years old, who enlisted because they believed in something bigger than themselves. Boys from farms in Iowa and factories in Pittsburgh who are currently sitting in foxholes in the Ardennes thinking the worst is behind them, writing Christmas letters home, completely unaware that they're positioned directly in the path of 250,000 German soldiers preparing to attack at dawn. The emotional weight of this knowledge is crushing. Patton has always been accused of being callous about casualties, of caring more about glory and advancement than the lives of his men. It's never been true, but he's done little to correct the impression. Now, staring at the map in the lamplight, he feels the full burden of command. These aren't abstract numbers or tactical pieces on a game board. They're men. Men he might be able to save if only someone would listen. December 16, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. The world explodes. Thousands of German artillery pieces open fire simultaneously along an 80-mile front in the Ardennes. The sound is apocalyptic. Trees shatter, the frozen ground erupts. American positions that were quiet moments before disappear in curtains of fire and steel. Soldiers barely have time to grab their weapons before the barrage lifts, and German infantry come pouring out of the fog like ghosts. Behind them, hundreds of tanks. SS Panzer divisions that weren't supposed to exist anymore, fully fueled, fully equipped, crashing through American lines that never meant to stop a major offensive. In headquarters across the Allied front, confusion reigns. Radio reports are fragmentary, contradictory, impossible to believe. Units are being overrun. Entire regiments are cut off. The quiet sector has become a nightmare of chaos and death. At Third Army headquarters, an officer bursts into Patton's office with the news. German offensive, major attack, Ardennes sector. Patton looks up from his desk. On the wall behind him, the map. The map that predicted this exact attack in this exact location. The map nobody believed. He doesn't say, "I told you so." There's no satisfaction in being right. There's only the grim knowledge that men are dying because the warning came too late. He looks at his staff officers, their faces pale with shock, and says simply, "Get me Eisenhower."
The scope of the German offensive becomes clear over the next few hours. This isn't a local counterattack. It's Operation Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's last gamble to change the course of the war. 250,000 German soldiers, nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, hundreds of tanks, all aimed at one goal: reach the Meuse River, cross it, drive to Antwerp, split the Allied armies, and force a negotiated peace. The attack comes in the worst possible weather. Fog and snow blanket the entire front, grounding Allied aircraft. The Germans have achieved complete surprise. American units that expected a quiet winter are being torn apart by an enemy that materializes out of nowhere. Communication lines are cut.
Entire battalions lose contact with headquarters. Officers make desperate stands with whatever troops they can gather. Some units fight brilliantly, others break and run. Chaos consumes the Ardennes. Individual stories emerge from the confusion. A small group of engineers holds a vital bridge for 3 hours against overwhelming odds, buying time for others to escape. A medic crawls through machine gun fire to reach wounded men, treating them in a ditch while artillery shells land around him. A young lieutenant, who's been in combat for exactly 5 days, rallies confused soldiers and organizes a fighting retreat that saves dozens of lives. In the town of Bastogne, a critical road junction, American forces begin to coalesce into a desperate defense. They're surrounded, outnumbered, running low on ammunition and medical supplies, but they hold, and their resistance begins to slow the German advance. For every story of heroism, there's a story of suffering. Men freezing in foxholes with no winter clothing, wounded soldiers left behind in overrun aid stations, prisoners taken in the confusion, marched east in long columns. Civilians caught in the crossfire, their towns becoming battlegrounds. The German advance is faster than anyone thought possible. Within 48 hours, they've penetrated 30 miles into Allied lines. Towns that were safely behind the front are suddenly under attack. Supply depots are overrun. Headquarters units evacuate in chaos. The bulge in the Allied line grows deeper every hour. At Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower faces the worst crisis of his command. The Allied offensive is stalled. The initiative has shifted to the enemy. If the Germans reach the Meuse and cross it, the war could drag on for months or even years. Every available unit is being rushed to contain the breakthrough, but the weather makes movement almost impossible. Roads are clogged with refugees and retreating troops. Supplies can't be moved forward. Air support is grounded. It's a commander's nightmare. This is when Patton's preparation becomes critical. While other commanders are scrambling to respond, Patton is already moving. The contingency plans he made weeks ago, the supply lines he extended, the routes he pre-planned, all of it activates like a machine that's been waiting to run. He meets with Eisenhower and makes a promise that seems impossible. He can disengage 3 divisions from his current operations, pivot them 90 degrees north, move them over 100 miles in winter conditions, and attack the southern flank of the German breakthrough in 48 hours. His staff thinks he's insane. Moving an entire army that distance in this weather while maintaining combat effectiveness violates every principle of military logistics. It can't be done. Eisenhower looks at Patton and sees something in his eyes. Certainty, preparation, the look of a man who's been ready for this moment for weeks. He gives the order. Do it. The Third Army begins to move. 90,000 men, hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles all turning north in the middle of winter to attack an enemy that's winning. It's a logistical miracle that shouldn't be possible. Convoys roll through ice and snow. Tanks use improvised chains welded to their treads to grip frozen roads. Supply trucks drive through the night with blackout lights, navigating by memory and hope. Soldiers who haven't slept in days keep moving because stopping means freezing. Officers at every level work without rest, coordinating movements, solving problems, keeping the machine running. And through it all, the map. Patton's map, the one everyone dismissed, becomes the blueprint for the counterattack. The German positions he predicted weeks ago are exactly where he marked them. The attack routes he suspected are the ones being used. His entire maneuver aligns with intelligence that everyone else thought was meaningless. The map has become his silent compass, guiding the rescue.
The human cost of this movement is staggering. Men push themselves beyond what should be possible. Frostbite becomes epidemic. Soldiers arrive at their attack positions exhausted, cold, undersupplied. But they arrive. On December 22nd, 6 days after the German offensive began, Patton's army attacks north into the southern flank of the German Bulge. The impact is immediate. German units that were driving west suddenly find themselves fighting for survival. The momentum of their offensive stalls. Units that were supposed to be racing for the Meuse are instead desperately defending against American counterattacks. The Bulge stops growing. The crisis begins to turn. The relief of Bastogne becomes the symbol of this turning point. The town has been surrounded for days, holding out against overwhelming force. Supplies are running low, casualties are mounting, but the defenders refuse to surrender. When German officers deliver an ultimatum demanding surrender, the American commander sends back a one-word reply.
nuts. It becomes legendary. On December 26th, Patton's forces break through the German lines and reach Bastogne. The siege is lifted. Men who thought they were going to die are rescued. The desperate defense is vindicated. And the map, Patton's overlooked, dismissed, hand-drawn map, has guided the army that saved them. The Battle of the Bulge continues for another month. The Germans, realizing their offensive has failed, fight desperately to extract their forces before they're cut off completely. The weather clears, allowing Allied air power to devastate German supply lines. Reinforcements pour in from all directions. Slowly, at terrible cost, the Bulge is reduced. German forces are pushed back to their starting positions. By the end of January 1945, the last great German offensive is over. Hitler's gamble has failed. But the cost is staggering. Nearly 90,000 American casualties, 19,000 dead, entire divisions shattered, towns and villages destroyed, civilians displaced. The largest and bloodiest battle American forces fight in Europe. All of it predicted weeks in advance by a map that almost nobody believed. In the aftermath, when the counting is done and the ground is retaken, Patton returns to his headquarters. The map is still there, pinned to the wall, covered in marks and notations that turned out to be frighteningly accurate. Officers who dismissed him weeks ago now look at it with something like awe. The patterns he saw were real. The predictions were correct. The preparation saved thousands of lives. But Patton takes new satisfaction in vindication. He thinks instead about the men who died, the ones who could have been saved if the warning had been heeded earlier. The young soldiers who froze to death in foxholes because the attack caught them without winter gear. The units that were overrun in the first hours because nobody expected them to be in danger. The map predicted the attack, but it couldn't prevent the suffering. The Battle of the Bulge enters history as one of the war's defining moments. A last desperate gamble by a regime facing defeat, a test of Allied resolve and military effectiveness, a demonstration of American resilience and courage. But for those who know the full story, it's also a lesson in the value of foresight and the cost of complacency. Patton saw what others missed because he was willing to look at data that contradicted the prevailing narrative. He trusted patterns over optimism. He prepared for disaster when everyone else was planning for victory. The map was his tool, but the real weapon was his willingness to believe what the evidence showed him, even when it was inconvenient and unwelcome. The story of the map raises uncomfortable questions. How many other warnings are ignored because they don't fit the story we want to believe? How many disasters unfold because the people who see them coming can't convince others to listen? In military history, in business, in science, in everyday life, there are always people who see patterns that others miss. Sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they're obsessive, sometimes they're right, and their warnings are dismissed until it's too late. Patton's map is a reminder that the most valuable intelligence isn't always the most welcome, that preparation for worst-case scenarios isn't pessimism, it's responsibility, and that the cost of not listening can be measured in lives. Today, if you could see that map, you'd see a simple piece of paper covered in pencil marks. Nothing dramatic, no sophisticated technology, just careful observation, pattern recognition, and the courage to trust what the evidence revealed. 3 converging lines that predicted one of history's bloodiest battles, a tool that almost nobody took seriously until it was proven correct in fire and blood. The officers who rolled their eyes at Patton's warnings in November stood silent in January, looking at a map that had predicted everything.
The legacy of this story extends beyond World War II. Every intelligence analyst studying asymmetric threats, every risk manager modeling unlikely scenarios, every person trying to warn about dangers that others don't see yet, they're all working in the tradition of Patton's map, looking at seemingly random data and finding the pattern, trusting analysis over consensus, being willing to be wrong publicly if there's a chance of preventing disaster. It's not glamorous work, it's often thankless. The people who successfully predict crises are rarely celebrated because the crises they prevent don't happen and nobody remembers to thank them. But when the warnings are ignored, when the patterns are dismissed, when the maps are pushed aside as paranoid fantasies, the consequences are written in graveyards. There's a final irony to this story. The map that predicted the Battle of the Bulge was never classified as secret intelligence. It was assembled from sources available to any competent intelligence officer. The data was there for everyone to see.
Patton's genius wasn't accessing secret information. It was looking at the same information everyone else had and seeing what it actually meant. The clue that predicted disaster was hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to connect the dots. History loves to hide its answers in the obvious, waiting for someone smart enough or stubborn enough to look past what everyone knows is true and see what the evidence actually shows. When the war ended and the histories were written, Patton's role in the Battle of the Bulge was celebrated. The speed of his army's redeployment became legendary. The relief of Bastogne became an iconic moment. But the map, the quiet preparation, the weeks of warning that nobody heeded, those details faded into footnotes, perhaps because they're uncomfortable. It's easier to celebrate reactive heroism than to acknowledge preventable disaster, easier to praise the rescue than to ask why the rescue was necessary. The map predicted everything, almost nobody listened, and thousands died because preparation was mistaken for paranoia. Somewhere in an archive, that map might still exist, a piece of paper with thin lines and faded markings that once held the key to saving lives. If you held it now knowing what it predicted, you'd see it differently than the officers who dismissed it in 1944. You'd see the weight of knowledge ignored, the burden of being right when nobody believes you, the terrible responsibility of seeing disaster coming and being unable to prevent it because the very thing that proves you're right hasn't happened yet. Patton's map is a reminder that the most important intelligence isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just connecting dots that everyone else thinks are random noise. Sometimes it's trusting patterns over hope. Sometimes it's being willing to be wrong if there's a chance of being right about something that matters. A map predicted a battle. A man believed it, and thousands lived because he refused to ignore what everyone else dismissed. But thousands more died because the warning came too late, because certainty was mistaken for fear, because evidence was less persuasive than optimism. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last desperate gamble, but it was also the Allies' last great failure of imagination, the moment when victory seemed so certain that warnings of defeat sounded like madness. In the end, the map was right. The patterns were real. The preparation saved lives. But the lesson, the uncomfortable lesson that every generation seems to need to learn again, is that the people who see danger coming aren't always wrong just because we don't want them to be right. Sometimes the map that everyone ignores is the map that saves your life, if only you're wise enough to listen before it's too late.